And there were approximately $2.4 million allocated to this program to ensure that underserved and socially disadvantaged and small-scale producers had access to both direct economic relief grants, technical assistance to apply for grant programs, federal and state, in order to leverage more funding into the state of California. And additionally, technical assistance that organizations would help these producers to be able to pivot in times of great distress and specifically related to business planning, marketing, other risks and challenges that they were facing. Now, this program also funded, so nonprofits, organizations, tribal governments were eligible to apply for that $1.1 million there, and we funded 7 organizations through that. And $1.3 million actually went to UC A&R to help support hiring of additional 3 small farm advisors and 7 community educators. And those people hired were really focused on providing access and information in languages other than English, and again, targeting those most underserved by previous economic relief efforts and targeting those challenges that they were facing in COVID. Now, the direct economic relief grant was another component. This ensured that farmers were able to receive small micro grants, again, to help overcome some of those immediate challenges that they were facing. These economic relief grants were really designed to help them get through the year and challenges that they were facing that was flexible and accommodated the various challenges that they were facing that weren't necessarily covered through other economic relief grants that were offered at the state and federal level. And to date, 245 grants have been given. This is to date, so there are many more in process. And as we are going forward, next slide, Josh. The governor has allocated additional drought relief funding, so that will go again to just direct farmer relief grants, and particularly focusing on some of the challenges that these same farmers are facing due to drought. And we have $5 million thus far, and hopefully that will become a larger number going forward, because there is a great need still.
Perfect. Thank you, Thea. So on the next slide, Carolyn Cook, who is our resident expert on the OFI programs, the technical assistance programs, is unfortunately unavailable today. And so I will do my best to stand in for Carolyn, but when we get to the question and answer portion, you'll just have to give me a little grace. So the first program, there are a couple of programs within OFI that I really want to highlight that reduce barriers to participation in Cdfa's incentive programs. That's really how they were designed. So Assembly Bill 2377, passed in 2018, was really one of those items that was meant to address barriers and ensure that there was equitable participation among farmers and ranchers in Cdfa's incentive programs. So this bill says that 5% of appropriations will be made available as technical assistance for applicants and awardees of 3 programs: the Healthy Soils Program, the Alternative Manure Management Program, and the State Water Efficiency and Enhancement Program. So AMP, Healthy Soils, and SWEEP. And so within those funds will go to nonprofits, resource conservation districts, cooperative extension, to ensure that applicants are able to apply for those funds and that they're able to implement the projects once funding is awarded. And so this is technical assistance specific to those 3 projects. And within that, there's an equity component that says Cdfa must ensure that 25% of the technical assistance funds are used to provide assistance to socially disadvantaged farmers and ranchers, and that technical assistance providers should prioritize assistance to farms of 500 acres or less. The equity component we're going to go over at the end. This is just one piece around farm equity at Cdfa, but Thea will speak more about that at the end after we've gone through all the programs. So in the next slide, you'll see kind of the scope of those technical assistance activities. So if funded, the technical assistance providers in the Climate Smart Agriculture Technical Assistance Program will provide outreach on AMP Healthy Soils and SWEEP, as well as application assistance to those programs. So assistance can look like a lot of things. So it can look like project design, application writing and submission, completion of required tools like Comet Planner, or answering questions that applicants might have about the funding or about the projects that they can complete with the funding. There's also kind of back-end activities if farmers and ranchers receive funding from Cdfa to complete a project, such as coordination of grant execution with Cdfa and then implementation of those incentivized projects, including technical guidance, vendor coordination, and reporting. So some of the outcomes of that, of this program is there have been 3 solicitations for technical assistance providers since 2019. They're listed up by fiscal year on the screen. So among those, there's been about 5.1 million awarded to date, and we've reached about 2,000 farmers and ranchers. Some of those projects are really new and have not even reported outcomes yet. And it's also good to note that all of those agreements are active. So while it says that we've reached around nearly 2,000 farmers and ranchers thus far, that number is expected to grow. All right. So there's also the UC&R Community Education Specialist. So this is a partnership that was initiated in 2018 through an MOU with with UC&R and support from the California Strategic Growth Council. The idea is with these is to really provide a regional contact. These community education specialists are meant to serve as a regional contact to inform farmers and ranchers in historically underserved communities about Cdfa incentive programs that they may be eligible for, and really provide targeted outreach and education. So the focus is on implementing on-farm solutions to improve soil health, nutrient management, irrigation management, on-farm composting, and manure management in those communities. The supported activities include outreach and education, as I've spoken about, application and project implementation assistance. There's some overlap there with the Climate Smart Ag Technical Assistance program, but this is really, they're meant to be more of a centralized spot for answering questions and providing information. They also provide educational programs and field days, case studies, and white paper development. So for all of the other programs, we provided kind of the general number of farmers and ranchers that have been reached with the investment. So this is a $4.8 million investment for 10 positions over approximately 3.5 years. We haven't included the number of farmers and ranchers that have been reached because really the capacity building that these positions provide goes beyond that. It's not just the one-on-one direct relief with direct interaction with farmers and ranchers. It's also those educational programs and the outreach materials that they're creating. And so that's why we don't have that particular outcome metric for you today. All right, so on the next slide, so we also have the Water Efficiency Technical Assistance Program, or WETA. So this program, the next 2 programs that I'm going to talk to you about, so the first 2 were really to help ensure that there's access to Cdfa's Climate Smart Agriculture programs and incentive dollars. These next 2 programs are really intended to be responsive to industry and farmer needs. So WETA in particular is really to provide technical assistance for water efficiency and nutrient management for farmers and ranchers in light of the drought. So this is really outside of the Cdfa incentive dollars, whether or not these farmers and ranchers are participating in our programs. This technical assistance money will provide water efficiency and nutrient management support. So some of the supported activities include access to mobile irrigation labs, so on-farm evaluation of irrigation system efficiency, and then subsequent recommendations and support for the growers, pump efficiency testing, and then training on water efficiency and nutrient management. There was $5 million awarded to this program in the 2021 budget bill through the Drought and Water Resilience package. They've recently finished up the application rounds for that, so it would be the applicants will have 3 years on their grant term, and the maximum amount awarded is $500,000. All right, so on the next slide, you'll see kind of the outcomes from that first round that we've done of funding. So There were 20 WEDA applications submitted for $9.3 million in funding. There was only $5 million available, so it's about 180% oversubscribed. 11 projects were selected. They were just informed within the week, so we'll see what those outcomes are once those projects are implemented on the ground. And you can see a list of the awarded projects online. All right, and the final program is the Conservation Ag Planning Program. The idea of this program was really to make sure that it was in response to a lot of stakeholder feedback that was heard at the Environmental Farming Ag Science Advisory Panel. And it was meant to lower barriers to implementation and application for incentive dollars. So it seemed that, if you have one of these eligible plans, you had a leg up in applying for incentive funding. And so this was really to lower that barrier. The focus would be on funding the development of these plans that identify actions for climate change mitigation and adaptation, as well as further environmental stewardship on farms and ranches. So this is to take into account all of the environmental stewardship that's already happening and then plan for the future. So all of these plans, and I will spare you and not list all of them, but all of them are eligible for funding. The application is forthcoming. We're estimating that we'll be able to open that up for applicants in the summer of 2020. There was $17 million awarded in the 2021 Budget Act. And one thing that I want to kind of draw your attention to is the $7 million that's set aside to support organic transition. And that includes 2 of the eligible plan types, so the organic system plans or other conservation plans that support organic transition. And that can really be linked to lowering the cost of transition to an organic system and then also accessing markets as an organic grower. All right, so with that, I will turn it over to our virtual participant, Lena Nguyen, who will talk about the Inspection Services Division program.
Good afternoon, can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Okay, so you can go to the slide. Hello and good afternoon. My name is Lena Nguyen and I oversee the Technical Assistance Program. It was developed by Cdfa Inspection and Compliance Branch in 2019 in order to assist the Produce Safety Program in providing education and resources to California farmers at no cost, especially those small and very small growers who may not have the same resources and understanding of the food safety practices as the larger growers. It was designed to ensure that these small-scale produce farms become compliant with the Federal Food Safety Modernization Act Produce Safety Rule. The Technical Assistance Program endeavors to fill that void with outreach and education. We have developed contracts with the University of California Cooperative Extension to provide regional educators and advisors who can provide one-on-one assistance to farmers with their expertise in on-farm food safety and production practices. Team members are fluent in multiple languages, Spanish, Hmong, Mandarin, and Portuguese, to serve the diversity of farmers across California. TAP has developed a website to develop, TAP has developed a website to provide additional resources as well as brochures in multiple languages. More recently, the TAP resource has been used to reach back out to farmers that have had multiple issues on their inspections. Here are some of the resources that TAP provides. Training on good agricultural practices, which could be informational fact sheets, videos, one-on-ones, or more recently, online learning platforms. How to implement FSMA produce safety rules, Produce Safety Alliance grower training, which helps with guidance for building a food safety program, assistance and preparation for FSMA PSR inspections. On-farm technical assistance. This is tailored to the needs of small-scale growers and includes on-farm demonstrations. We also do support for growers, whether that's grower discussion groups or maybe connections with state and national small farm groups. And then, of course, continuing educational events, which is a multitude of training courses or educational conferences, and also help with like farm inspector training. Next slide. Some more general information about TAP. We are generally funded, and to date, we funded approximately 1 million plus the upcoming contracts. To date, we've awarded about 4 contracts, have done about 30 outreach events, and have served about 1,200 farmers to date. Next slide. Here you can see the TAP team and administration headquarters is at Cdfa in Sacramento. For UCCE, their headquarters is located at UC Davis, and their advisors and educators can be found throughout the state of California, whether that's the greater Sacramento area, Central Coast, Central Valley, or Southern California. And then you can see we have the websites for both the TAP program where you can find my information as well as some resources, and then also the UCCE's website where you can find all the advisors and educators as well as their resources. Yeah, so thank you. I'll pass it on to the next.
All right, thank you so much, Lena. So I'm just going to bring us back around to kind of our overall outcomes. When we're talking about technical assistance and capacity building, it's hard to really capture all of the good that these contracts can do. So we've made an attempt at it, but there are some pretty big caveats in some of the numbers that you see on the screen. So we've allocated about 37 million thus far. So it's a huge investment for technical assistance, and that's been allocated since 2018. Only 18 million of this has been awarded to date. We have some big investments coming up this year. So that's going to be really exciting for Cdfa and for farmers and ranchers across the state that are utilizing these technical assistance or accessing these technical assistance providers. The majority of the contracts are still in progress. So when I say that we've reached 5,500 farmers and ranchers directly and we've assisted them directly, that's a drop in the bucket of what's going to happen by the end of the contracts. So those 5,500 farmers have been reached via the Climate Smart Agriculture Technical Assistance Program, 3 of the 4 rounds we have outcomes for, the first round of the CUSP program, and then the Food Safety Technical Assistance Program. And so let's say for some reason we stop all of those contracts tomorrow. So we only reach these 5,500 farmers and ranchers, which we can agree is not going to happen. We're going to finish those out. So even if we were to only reach those 5,500 farmers and ranchers, it only costs $1,500 per person to assist these farmers and ranchers and really lower the barriers to applying to these incentive dollars, to planning for environmental stewardship in the future, for complying with state regulations. We expect that per person dollar amount to really decrease drastically as we implement the rest of these funds. And so I just want to say that, like, very conservatively, investment in technical assistance can have a really huge impact in scaling up practices and helping farmers and ranchers to comply with environmental regulations. And so it's a really wise investment. Specifically in reaching kind of historically underserved farmers and ranchers who might have more difficulty in accessing these programs and complying with state regulations. And so to speak more to that, as our final presenter before we take your questions, I'm going to turn it once more over to Thea Rittenhouse.
Thank you so much. Just a couple of final thoughts to wrap up our discussion today, and then we're looking forward to any questions that you might have. Really just wanted to tie in the whole conversation today that we've had. You've heard some really great examples of how Cdfa is designing programs that are serving the most underserved, the socially disadvantaged farmers and ranchers. But how does technical assistance is a tool that we have to be able to allocate resources and address some of the underlying barriers that exist. And you've heard some of the presenters today mention some of those barriers. Really tailoring technical assistance that is flexible, that is responsive to stakeholders, that highlights and prioritizes the needs of the most underserved groups is one way that we are starting to address some components of the Farmer Equity Act, AB 1348. Now, our goal ultimately is to ensure that equity is embedded across all of our TA programs and grant programs in general. But really to get there, we're starting off with this tool to be able to ensure that we're using the data that we're getting from these programs to drive our decisions, using those metrics to tailor programs or even design new programs like the CUSP program that is based on that, that need and the need of the most historically underrepresented or not served through our programs. And that was a big piece of the Farmer Equity Act. That was why it was created. The Farmer Equity Report identified the need to ensure that technical assistance is prioritized within programs. Certainly this concept is not going to go away, and we have an incredible wealth of TA providers across our state because we grow so many crops here, we have so many diverse communities that grow these crops, and we have the expertise, and making sure that we're funding those programs by prioritizing that expertise and examples like the contracts with UC-A&R, like Kitchen Table Advisors, and other groups that really have this expertise, understand the conditions and concerns and priorities of those communities. I mean, it's something that we're starting to do at Cdfa. You've seen these examples. We have metrics that we're starting with, like a 25% set aside. We can certainly do more than that, and we can do more than that as we're making decisions based on the data that we're collecting, and making sure that we're standardizing those priorities and those definitions across our programs. So I'll stop there and happy to take questions. We are.
Mostly Thea.
Thank you for your presentations. They really show what's changed at Cdfa and the effectiveness of the programs and the technical assistance. I was just kind of curious, you guys with the technical assistance providers, do you see a higher success rate for the grants that are being submitted for the different programs because of the technical assistance? I think I know the answer, but go ahead.
Well, that's a question that we haven't yet begun to measure. I think we can look at the number of dollars that have been allocated and the number of programs that socially disadvantaged farmers and ranchers have applied to our CSA programs in particular. But that is definitely a gap and a need in terms of how we're collecting our data on our programs and evaluating them.
No, I remember a lot of comments early on that the grant applications were extremely difficult to fight through. So definitely a need out there. Glenda?
Yeah, I just really want to give Karen and her team some significant kudos because in my experience in 30-some years in public policy, anytime an organization or an agency gets new money for new programs, their automatic thought is stand it up from scratch, put your logo all over it, hello, get the credit, right? And what Karen has done here by utilizing cooperative extension and kitchen table advisors, conservation districts, existing infrastructure in the field, has leveraged these dollars so much. I mean, you think about that infrastructure, cooperative extension, offices in every county that already had desks and vehicles and phones that these people could use hitting the ground running. Thanks to Karen's leadership, other state agencies are starting to do that now too. And I think ultimately that example is really going to serve California in the long run. And I'm doing my best to do it for my organization too, leveraging existing partners. I think if all of us do that, we're just going to get so much more bang for these bucks, I'll tell you.
So can I add to all of this? Because we started out with, we get one-time money, we want to make sure that we're reaching the right people. How do we have it all have longer legs and some permanency? Because when there's so many grant dollars coming out, but we can only give it out in very limited amounts of time, that's very hard for organizations themselves to do the planning and the hiring appropriately. So that's one thing for us all to think about going forward together. And just because I was a 4-H kid, I always wanted to work for cooperative extension, so it's the best I could do. I had to move to California to do that. But when we look at this network that we have here, other agencies are doing this, and we have seen the value of that at the Strategic Growth Council. we saw the value immediately in the submission of the Sustainable Ag Land Conservation Grants when we started doing planning grants and technical assistance to help with that. Yesterday, I was in a long meeting with our Deputy Secretary Jameson, who had to leave, on how it's going with the new Multi-Benefit Land Repurposing Act that's coming out at the same time as this wonderful California Economic Resiliency Fund, which is all about regional, place-based, inclusive economic development. They all need technical assistance, and we're starting to get our technical assistance into its own silos. It's supposed to be about the whole infrastructure of technical assistance that's throughout the entire state of California. So we're saturating every community of need with a whole scheme of players in that. And if I had a plea to make, I'm looking at the back of the room because you're going to hear from Nick, and he's going to get regional coordinators. And I want Josh to have regional coordinators working with our community colleges. How do we make all of that work better so that 2 + 2 turns into not just 5, 7? That's like my challenge to all of ya. Is like, this is something we can do when one-time funds may not be available or they'll be greatly diminished. We've built the infrastructure to help people access, whether it's philanthropy or community lending programs or other types of programs. We have created something that will allow for years to come many people to have full access. I just think that's really important for me to say, because I want to make sure that what we do here, as the Dane said, Denmark and California, we can change the world, and that's what we're here to do, folks. Don't you ever forget.
Eric, go ahead.
Yeah, just following up on that. This presentation, sorry you guys are masked from me, but it reminded me of, I was privileged to attend a Climate Smart Ag delegation trip to Australia a few years ago with some of the folks. And we were introduced to an organization called Landcare Australia. And, as is a risk when you go on a field trip and you learn very little about an organization in like 1 or 2 hours, you're so impressed. And you think, well, they must be doing it better than us. But what it's causing me to think about right now is, do we have the kind of institutional infrastructure to ride through the ups and downs, just as you're describing? And is there something to be learned from? So one of the unique features of that program, if you're not familiar with it, is it's like a very famous organization in Australia. Apparently, everybody in Australia knows about Landcare, right? And I was impressed by that because I've been one of those people doing projects on the ground with RCDs and whatnot, and you feel like nobody knows what we're doing. No, nobody knows about it, nobody cares. Whereas in Australia, everybody knows it and everybody cares, apparently. I don't know, could be wrong. But where I'm headed with this is, at what point could we sort of just like diagnose our delivery system to see if it's optimized? I'm struck by, there's lots of organizations getting grants. There's UC's playing a role. Cdfa's playing a role, RCDs are playing a role. There's a lot of smaller nonprofits and whatnot, lots of needs that we're trying to meet. It's a very kind of American approach, like kind of like just stir the pot, create some chaos, and then good stuff comes from it. And my impression was that in Australia, it was a lot more kind of coordinated, not necessarily better, but just really curious, like what's the right way to deliver all this?
I think you bring up a really important point, and I'm going to say there's a lot of things that I want to forget about during COVID. But there were several of the most important learning lessons ever that I hope that we carry on as just part of how we do business. And one is how much of our society is hard to reach, whether it's language, socioeconomic reasons, documentation, lack of trust in government because they're newer to the country and maybe they were refugees. We learned so much when we thought we were doing so good by first having everything bilingual and then 5 languages on our way to 60, which is the minimum we should have, and then the trust factors that go with that. So I have oftentimes wondered, it seems like we're throwing dollars to the wind, except that community-based organization that is the one that can actually penetrate with the messaging that's truly going to be best for them. And when I think about Australia, It's a very diverse population, but in many ways are much more homogenous population than we are in California. So I think because we're blessed with the diversity that we have in this state, we do have to think about our outreach slightly differently. That's my theory.
Sure, Joy, go ahead.
You know, in the day, the medium was the message. Today, the messenger is the message, which is exactly what you're saying.
May I, Don, just to kind of build on what Karen has said, and Thea and her colleague, lost your name, sorry, but great presentation. I really appreciate it. It's making me think about all the work we're doing in our region and all the collaborators. We're collaborating with Cooperative Extension, the RCD, other nonprofits like ALBA, Farmer Incubator, California Farm Link. We're cooperating with FSA and RCS, and our group of farmers. We serve about 50 plus farmers in that region. They're all benefiting. I mean, COSPA is one of the grants that we actually are a part of, and that we're using as a resource to serve this community of farmers. And so these are your small farmers that are benefiting from these resources. And I'm a numbers guy. I come from a finance background. And so I do have an appreciation for trying to figure out how to measure it. But I can tell you that just with boots on the ground, it's having an impact, right? We're seeing the benefits to these smaller farmers. So, and the collaboration is just amazing. So that ecosystem that's been built around this different type of funding is working, and our farmers are benefiting from it because they're still in business. Are they filling up the bank accounts? I don't know we're there yet, but they're still in business, and they're still farming, and they're still planting. So,
Yep, I just hope we have continual funding for these programs long term, so that we can continue to expand on them.
Well, on that note, Don, just really quick, I think that even if this specific funding goes away, there's always going to be some sort of funding. But what this funding has done, even if it goes away, it's allowed us to understand how we can best work together to have an optimal impact on our farmers.
Right,
So,
and not only that, but the practices that get initiated will continue on and hopefully be expanded on. So I agree. Any other questions? Public comment on this item?
If you'd like to make public comment on this issue item, please use your hand icon and I will unmute your line. I do have one question in the chat. Do speakers have a thought on the ratio of technical assistance dollars to practice implementation dollars needed to really make progress on climate smart practice adoption? For example, every $1 million in practice implementation funding, how much money should be earmarked for technical assistance?
I can take one stab at that, partially from my previous work with NRCS. That's not a direct relationship, because oftentimes with farmers and landowners, if you can help them with the planning and understanding like best management practices and what to do, they don't necessarily need money to actually go implement. Some do, but some don't. So that you can't get a direct correlation there.
Yeah, no, that's a real good point. I agree with you. We've seen that too.
NRCS has studied that for years.
And I see no further questions.
Very good. We'd like to thank you for joining us this afternoon, and fantastic information. Thank you. All right, our next presentation will be from the Planting Seeds Farm to School Roadmap for Success. Nick Anisich, Cdfa Office of Farm to Fork, is with us. Nick serves as the main point of contact for CDFA's California Farm to School program and California Farmer Marketplace, communicating directly with farmers, food service directors, and the general public. Welcome, Nick.
Thank you all so much. Thank you, thank you. Do I need to get closer? Way closer? Okay, well, thank you all for having me here today. Like you said, I'm Nick Anisich. I'm the Farm to School Program Manager at CDFA in the Office of Farm to Fork. So I do all of our farm to school work and then as well as our new urban ag programs and farm to community food hub programs. Today we're focusing in on farm to school, and I kind of have a part A and a part B of our presentation. First part's about what we're doing. Second part is our plans for the future. So what is farm to school? It's not just local food procurement in schools. The focus of farm to school in the past had always been about food purchasing alone, but that doesn't get kids to eat the food. You need to engage them all along the way. So farm to school programs combine local food purchasing, education, and experiential learning. So when we talk about farm to school, it's not just procurement, it's all three in one. Next slide. And then why does farm to school matter? Again, this is such an intersectional issue. It sits right in the middle of all of these different topics. First and foremost, it's nutrition security in schools. Schools served more meals during the pandemic than food banks. They are the hub of nutrition security for youth and family, especially for youth throughout the state and throughout the nation. Farm to school, of course, intersects with education, with our educational impacts in the garden and farm, economic resilience by circulating dollars in the economy, environmental resilience by creating a stable marketplace for farmers to sell to, 180 school days. They know exactly how many kids are coming there every day to eat lunch. Is a very stable place to sell. It's not like a restaurant that has lots of variation and they have shorter life cycles sometimes. It's a very stable market, so we're excited about that. And the connection to the environment is that you know you're going to have this outlet, so you can try different things. You can map out the production practices that you would like to implement. And then racial justice and farm to school are connected across all these subject areas, increasing economic opportunity for producers of color, improving culturally relevant food access, and educational opportunities for youth. It's a really, really important program that we see across having the cafeteria menu items reflect the actual student population of that school, as well as having the educational opportunities in the garden, what you're growing there, align with the work that's happening in the cafeteria as well. So this is our farm to school network. We have 8 regions. If you're familiar at all with California FFA, you will be pretty familiar with this map. We took the FFA map and we added in LA and the Bay Area. So we're really excited to gather this network together. We do like webinars, you know, it's fun. We're excited to be making this happen in person now. So this summer and this spring, we're starting off regional open houses for all of our partners in these different areas of the state. And as the secretary mentioned before, we have 16 regional staff that are going to start in this summer. We're really excited about. They were in the governor's proposed January budget. So we'll have 2 staff members in each of those regions. Really exciting. All right, next slide, please. Last year, we had an $8.5 million grant program. Again, you all just hit on all these really important topics about one-time money and standing up a program and getting the dollars out, but also measuring all these key, impacts. So in 2021, we had 60 grantees throughout the state. They had to submit this application in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic, and we know what schools were going through during this time. We had 80 applicants. So that tells you that even during the hardest time to be a school nutrition director, to be an educator, to do all of this work, there were still 80 districts throughout the state that wanted to join. 60 grants were awarded. Each project connects local food purchasing and student engagement. It's not just one or the other in this case. So they're finally connecting the dots between school nutrition, feeding kids, and education. And it's really flexible funding that we were able to provide and allow for. So it funds staff, it funds food procurement, it funds infrastructure improvement, anything that those school districts need. If they can make the case that it will help them advance farm to school, then they're allowed to spend the money in that way. So it's really great. And like I said, we had over 80 applications, oversubscribed by $4.5 million during the pandemic. The last thing I'll point out on this slide is that you can see Reading is peeking its head a little too clearly on that map. We've been really working to fill the North State with farm to school programs as well and get connected in those regions, as well as filling in the Valley and Imperial County areas. Next slide, please. One highlight for you is Long Beach Unified. Why I wanted to highlight them is because they didn't have a farm to school program before this grant application, before this grant. They had school gardens, but the school nutrition department is so big, they feed, what's it say, 75,000 kids a day, breakfast and lunch. That's a lot. That's a pretty big restaurant. So it's hard for them to do really intentional procurement and find each individual vendor that's local and available and able to deliver. So Long Beach Unified got $500,000 to build gardens, hire educators, and buy local climate smart foods for school meals. So you can see, again, it's all 3 in 1. And then they were able to leverage our team support to locally source foods and overcome supply chain issues. So I have a quote on the next page, slide, that talks about that. This is just so many words. I'm not going to read the whole thing to you, but this, it's the first bullet is all about the school gardens that they built and how they organized the school garden connection with the nutrition department. The second bullet is the one I wanted to, second and third. We also made a fabulous connection with a family-owned farm in Riverside, Tarzadia Farms, to provide us with locally grown organic oranges to serve in the cafeteria. We were able to visit the farm to make nutrition ed materials to go along with the produce served. Students were so excited to learn that there are actual people, the Patel family, who lovingly grow and harvest the food they eat. Making that personal connection has been a big boost for us and a great learning experience for our students. And then the last bullet is really important because all this happened during COVID, is we had a 100% fill rate on our deliveries from our direct ship and food hub vendors for grant-funded purchase, locally grown produce, the highest fill rate of all of our vendors. So we talk a lot about like place-based change and regional food system development. Like that's what it is. It's really concrete connections. And even in Long Beach, like I said, a huge urban district, they were able to get out into Riverside and visit a farm and make this real. The farmers are real people too. I have little toddlers and there's a magic school bus with a robotic farm. It's not that. This is the opposite of that. So we're seeing this happen, all those little dots on the map. Each of those districts is telling stories like these. We do have a small evaluation for this first cohort. We have more coming that we're excited about. So that was the first batch of grantees. It was $8.5 million last year. This year we have a $30 million allocation to distribute for our grant program. And next year we have another $30 million allocation for the farm to school funding. The application is going to open this month, and the funding range for this round is larger than last time because schools are kind of coming out of COVID response. They have a little more capacity to do some more planning. So that means that they can fill out more in the app. We can give them more money. So $150,000 to $1 million for award amounts. And that's going to be based on, there's different tracks, but it's based on the scale of a school district. Long Beach has 75,000 kids. San Diego Unified has like 200,000 or something like that. Sacramento has 50,000. Like, there's a lot. So how do you balance that with the smaller rural schools, like up in the Nevada City area? There's a bunch of one school districts. So we have this flexible funding range. And then we added, it's now 4 grant tracks so that we're funding the entire school food system. One is procurement and education. That's for school districts to apply for funding to do procurement and education. Then there's early care and education grants. That's so that we can get to kids at a younger age so that they're more interested in these fruits and vegetables, whole and minimally processed foods. Then there's a producer grant this round. And this is for producers who sell food to schools, but who want to scale up their production. Oftentimes you have a stable market, but you're still only selling to the salad bar instead of the main plate because you can't scale it up. You need capital in order to make those investments in your farm. So the producer grant will allow that use of funds, as well as food safety certifications and increased liability insurance is always huge for farm to school. So those are all allowable in there. Then there's partnership and a collaboration grant. So we have all of these things. It's like for an individual school district, for an individual early care center, for an individual producer. Then we have our partnership and collaboration grant. That's to create these collaborative solutions. So like we were talking about Strategic Growth Council earlier and their transformative climate communities. and now they're regional climate communities. This is in alignment with that work where it's place-based, it's regional, and it's allowing these diverse partners to work together to scale solutions that are working for farm to school. Last round of funding, we funded a food hub with that work that's selling now. They applied, they were selling to 5 districts. Now they're selling to 8 school districts, and they're aggregating more local farms. So this is really going to help us scale. The last thing that's new in this round of funding is that it's prioritizing. Last year we recommended. This year we can prioritize healthy, equitable, resilient food system projects. So there's questions in the application of how are you working with small farmers, socially disadvantaged farmers and ranchers, that type of work, so that the schools who are typically just trying to get enough food in the door and out the door in the half-hour lunch are thinking about their food system impact and partnering in strategic ways to create a healthier, more equitable, more resilient food system. Okay, so that was like all that's happening. That was a pretty good sprint, I feel. So that's everything that's going on. And then this is, thank you, we just released the Planting the Seed Farm to School Roadmap for Success. This was a collaboration with first partner Jennifer Siebel-Newsome and Secretary Ross, co-hosting all of this work, and Rochelle in person again after all the roadmap meetings were on Zoom. So Josh, you could skip ahead to the next slide, has the layout. So this roadmap that was developed, we all have seen the government report that sits on the shelf. This one is not even on the shelf yet. That's how fresh. So we're going to keep it circulating. There were 3 different pieces to this roadmap development. First was the Interagency Working Group. So this is existing state leaders coming together to say, what resources do we have right now that we can layer to implement Farm to School? That was co-hosted by the first partner and Secretary Ross, and included all of the state agency leaders. Then there was an advisory group. This is 14 advisors from across the state, people like Alice Waters and Kat Taylor and Anna LePay and Andy Naja Reese. These people who are food system leaders who are really involved in local food system development. We were so grateful to have all of them. And we recognize 14 people plus state agency leaders is not reflective of the entire state. So then we added in 50 working group members to these different subject areas. School food, so we had school nutrition directors and school kitchen managers and staff were in one working group. Another one was agriculture. So this is the farmers selling to schools, the food hubs and aggregators. Then education, so school garden educators, principals, school board members. And then lastly, data and research. So people who've been looking at the food system, because we need to be able to evaluate and make real impact and say, here's what we actually did. And so these groups all work together. And again, 14 and 50 is 64? Still not reflective. So then we went out to these roundtable conversations. Plus it's hard to get farmers and people on Zoom, you know? Teachers are teaching, farmers are farming. They don't want to be on Zoom all day for a facilitated conversation on the school food system. So we did over 200 people engaged more broadly in the community, a culinary classroom, a group of farmers, a farm tour, all of these different things to get people engaged. After all of that, we came up with 4 goals and 8 recommendations. And these were really difficult to come up with because Farm to School has such separate audiences with producers, with teachers, with all of these people. So cultivate equity, nurture students, build climate resilience, and create scalable and sustainable change. And what I always say about these goals is that this is the first paragraph. We are applying for funding for Farm to School in California because it cultivates equity, nurtures students, and does this important work. From there, we had 8 specific recommendations for how do we move this work forward, keeping together the momentum from this really big group. So the first recommendation was to provide scalable support structures for farm to school growth. That's building out our network. So you saw the map on there. You know, I said there's not a lot of action in Reading right now. Like, we want to have somebody on the ground who can go tour those sites because we know there's activity happening, but we haven't tapped into it. We haven't built that relationship yet to bring them into the fold. So that's 1. 2, transform school meal environments and experiences in collaboration with youth. We're not doing this to them. We're not fixing their school food menu for them. We're doing it with them. They need to be involved in the process. in guiding the work. Invest in school food careers and scratch cooking infrastructure. That's clear. Develop model food education standards and expand youth leadership opportunities. So this will provide an umbrella for all these different educators, whether you're a science teacher, an art teacher, humanities, however you're getting into it, you can connect to food, not just nutrition, not just health, but food and the cultural context of food and all of the different things that entails. That's the first 4. The next 4, strengthen relationships between producers and schools and expand and create inclusive access to school food markets for a wide range of producers. 5 is really about that human-to-human connection. I love the thing that you said earlier about the messenger is the message. We need to have those relationships on the ground and build that web of trust. And then number 6 is about policy. What policies are in place with USDA procurement, or what challenges are there around policy so that not everyone can access the school food market. 7 and 8 come last. 7, change the culture of school food through storytelling. We need to promote these school food heroes and tell their story. If you're working in a restaurant, you're doing farm to fork, that's incredible, and we love that story. Imagine doing that at this scale. Imagine how many more farms you could know. Imagine how many more kids you could work with, how many more of these recipes you can develop. And we want to honor that work that's happening in the school kitchens as much as we honor the restaurant work, which is so valuable. And then last is about data and evaluation and metrics. So how can we establish consistent metrics for farm to school? Nobody's required to do farm to school. There are no required metrics unless you're in our grant. Okay. Here's how those recommendations turned out, how they're already coming to life. So the roadmap was in development all last year. In January, we saw the governor's proposed budget, school meals for all to provide nutrition security for kids through schools. An additional $30 million proposed for next year's Farm to School Incubator grant program. So that would take it from $30 million next year to $60 million. $150 million in school kitchen infrastructure and training. In January, the governor proposed an additional $450 million to be added to that investment so that we can get to scratch cooking kitchens. $15 million for farm to community food hubs last year. Those food hubs will, of course, be in relationship with the schools. And then the 16 regional staff. So that's how all these things are coming to life and moving forward so far. All right, next slide. And then there's new federal initiatives that this program layers onto. $200 million in local food for schools. $23 million of that is for California to support local food for schools. So we're working on that application now. And then in 2022, there's also going to be a White House conference on food, nutrition, hunger, and health. And a lot of the sponsors involved in that are really involved in farm to school. So we see a lot of these overlaps and connections. All right, what comes next? The Farm to School Incubator Grant. If you know your local school districts, you have people that are engaged, your local FFA chapter. Our application, we want to open up May 9th, and there's up to $1 million in funding. We're going to have weekly info and Q&A sessions. So this is not a good luck. Hope you can fill it out. This is ask us all the questions. So that's my last slide. That's my contact info for anyone who wants to email or ask questions, long term. So thank you.
Yep, Rochelle?
Well, of course, I want to comment.
Yeah.
Firstly, I want to thank Secretary Ross when she invited me to be part of this effort. And she told me, you better roll up your sleeves because it's going to be real work. I'm like, what do you mean real work? And she wasn't kidding. The fact that Nick was able to summarize what we did in 7 slides makes me laugh because I really just want to commend Nick for his leadership and being able to pull all these people together. And again, the fact that this was during the pandemic, if you can imagine a Zoom meeting with 100+ people, putting the little Post-its in the virtual world and coming back with your little animals, it was challenging. We had homework. You had to come back with information. You had to interview groups. And I'm just so proud of the work that came out of the roadmap. But I cannot commend Nick and the staff and all of the agencies that worked together on this. And they weren't not that it matters what level they are, but they were high-level people from all of these agencies that were there. And the fact that First Partner had been part of these conversations and not just putting a name on it and expecting the work to happen. This was a lot of sweat, tears, and blood that went into this. And I just want to say congratulations, and also for making sure that early education is part of this effort, because that was a very big, important piece for me, because it's not just about the young children, it's about how you educate a family and a community.
Thank you so much for being part of it, and thank you for those kind words. Thank you.
Did she say never again? I think I heard that. But not to off-put anybody else for the committees you're going to be on.
So I love the fact you showcased the Long Beach example, and I hope you've got other examples perhaps on the website there. Yeah. But a question, and maybe this is getting into the weeds a bit, but one of the examples out there that I've been particularly impressed with is what Riverside Unified School District did in actually serving as the aggregation hub, because that's always been one of the real problems. But part of what they've done to get their economies of scale is they're serving more than just the school lunch program. Is that allowed under your grant program, or does that create an issue?
That's allowed under the grant program as long as you also serve the school lunch program.
Great.
And Scott, the Riverside Food Hub leader, was emailing me this morning with questions about it. So they're really engaged. And I think they also vend, they serve Riverside, and then they also vend to 8 other school districts.
Yes. Well, and I think they do like their jail and hospital or something like that. I mean, and that's an example I think needs to be around the state more, because that's the challenge for the aggregation hubs, is that economies of scale.
Yeah.
And Nick, I've got a question. I mean, I understand you're around schools, but you're talking about the majority of the schooling in the fall, winter, spring, when a lot of the ag products come off during the middle of the summer.
Yeah.
So how do you get the variety you need? I guess when it's winter crops primarily, or fall, winter.
It's a great question, and most schools start off with lettuce and fruit, and so a lot of citrus is in school meal programs as a starting point. And those lettuces, they're getting in the cooler season as well. What we're finding now is schools are really like experimenting with persimmons as a harvest of the month program, and they're trying to fill these interesting gaps. Normally, the best practice has been that the school district is talking to the kids in the program and asking them what they eat during that time of year, and getting that on the menu. The other thing is that our grant allows whole or minimally processed foods. So there is frozen product, canned product, and dried product available too. Mm-hmm.
Great.
Yeah, no, I really appreciated the presentation, Nick, and I'm really excited about the work you guys are doing. And I just have to share a little bit about the experience I've had. And I'm curious to hear from you and like how you and your team are thinking about some of the challenges that I've seen. So I'm from the Salinas Valley, and I, along with my colleague from Alba, Chris Brown, have made multiple attempts to try to sell our small producers fruits and vegetables to the local schools. Yeah. And the thing they keep on coming back with is they need to chop up the stuff, right? Yeah. They can't take it whole because they don't know what to do with it, and they have to work through it quick because they just have to feed people, right? So strawberries are easy, for example. You don't do much to it, but zucchini is not easy to work with. They don't know how to deal with chard, for example, right? And so there's other vegetables that they have challenges with. So I guess the question here is, how are you thinking about this very challenge?
Yeah.
Because one of the ways we're trying to solve for it is partnering with the food bank from Monterey County and El Pájaro CDC, which have commercial kitchens where farmers can come in and process their foods. So just wanted to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah, it's a really interesting thing, and it goes back to our, wanting to know each region and know each place and the assets that are there. If you know that the food bank has a commercial kitchen that you can get access to, or the other center has a commercial kitchen space, then that's allowed all in our grants to use your time and grant award to process the foods in that way. The funding also allows for districts or farmers to buy that equipment. So if they need to do that, they can. It also layers with the $150 million school kitchen infrastructure investment that goes through the Department of Education to schools. So the schools are getting equipment funding for scratch cooking. Then we can fund the producers in collaborations with food hubs to help scale up the processing work. So we're hoping that by broadening the funding to include the whole school food system, that some of those solutions come out.
I want to ask a question of David, because originally we felt that with modernizing fairgrounds, making sure every fairground where it was viable had commercial scale kitchen that could be an economic hub for food entrepreneurship and for doing this kind of work. That's not going to work in all communities, but it's one, and I'm going to push this again, and we need to have a presentation maybe at the next meeting on the California Economic Resiliency Fund. There's a boatload of money there, but it's about how do you get people to come together within their region to identify priorities that would serve this kind of a need. And so I'm still going to keep on the fairgrounds with broadband. Joy, that was for Joy to make sure she's listening. Broadband and commercial kitchens, and we can make any business successful, I'm convinced. So it's just a thought. Yeah.
The last thing I'll add on that is sometimes, there's a lot of school districts in each community. And sometimes, we're really pushing, like, we got to get this district on board. And sometimes it just takes a long time to turn around, a giant ship. So sometimes it's okay to start at the smaller district. It's okay to start with the harvest of the month, one time per month, you're getting your crop in there. And then we can support you at Cdfa with our staff to help scale that and to help find, maybe it's multiple districts that we have to go to, or maybe we can get that bigger local district on board. But there's a lot of pieces, there's over 1,000 school districts. So there's a lot of opportunity there. Great question. So our team has 4 people. No, we have 4. Yeah. There's me, and then Amy on our team runs the Farm to School Network, and Michael on our team is the producer engagement person. So we're going to have a lot more. I'm just really excited for the wheels to keep spinning, Yeah.
So Nick, I agree with the problem David was talking about. I mean, I had a difficult time donating food from the field to the food bank. It had to be a certain way, and I think they expected it to be boxed, ready to go, and as you would if you're going to sell to a grocery store.
Yeah.
And typically farmers don't have that set up. For Salinas Valley, they may have a little more, but just wondered, is there technical assistance provided with this program?
Yeah, right now it's us, and then there's a number of nonprofit organizations that have been supporting Farm to School. Like CAF has been really involved in Farm to School and providing a lot of support.
But Glenda, I know you're bringing on some different disciplines for your farm advisors because you really are connecting the economic development angle and cooperative extension.
Several of them are our regional food systems advisors. We've got a few out already. Plus, some of our small farms advisors have been real leaders in helping organize this as well. And I'm thrilled you're talking about doing a surf thing. Micah, the CEO of California Forward, is the guy to talk to it, because California Forward and the State Economic Summit are the drivers behind that. It's very exciting. I've been on many planning meetings. Those regions are already working on proposals.
This is such an awesome program, by the way, and love Alice Waters. She's really awesome. I'm just wondering if you guys have some form of food waste program with some of the food that's not necessarily eaten by the schools.
It's a really great question. We were talking about it today with some of our partners, is that part of it is a food waste program where we're working with CalRecycle and others to provide best practices to schools on share tables, they're called, because you have to take the food from the school lunch line. Sometimes you just don't want that thing. So you could put it in a refrigerated share table for others to use, or it could go to the food bank. And then there's all the post-student use, post-consumer waste, and that's been a little bit trickier for now, where each district is trying to, because they need a full-time educator role in each of those cafeterias just to start sorting it. So we're working with CalRecycle to try to develop like a playbook, I think they were calling it, for schools. And then one of our grantees is working with LA Compost in order to work on their waste reduction. I think it's East Whittier School District.
And back to your earlier question, Karen, 2 cooperative extension advisors on organic materials management.
Yes,
will
please.
be recruited soon.
Yeah, yeah, we'll take it.
Do we have any other questions? Nope. Do you want to go to public comment on this item?
If you'd like to make public comment on this issue item, please use your hand icon and I will unmute your line. Nick, I do have one question from the chat. A speaker mentioned fruits and vegetables during the presentation. Does the farm to school program encompass all foods grown by California farmers and ranchers as long as they are climate smart?
Yes, it allows funding for all food, all whole or minimally processed foods. So we have some districts buying beef as well as chicken. So it's all allowed.
And I'm seeing no further questions at this time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Josh. Thank you, Nick.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. You have to come back, fill us in as this moves forward.
Mr. President, I know that Virginia Jameson has presented to the board, but it was like cyber presentations, and she's at the back of the room, so I just wanted to acknowledge Deputy Secretary Virginia Jameson, who's probably putting the finishing touches on a grant we're submitting with UC A&R on climate smart commodity partnerships. So I'm sure she's. Thank you so much, Glenda.
Public comment on any other items not on the agenda? Yeah, that's fine. Do we have any?
Well, I mean, recommend whatever you want to do.
Sure. All right. All right. Board discussion. Any recommendations coming from the board today? Nope.
I said
Go ahead, Eric.
I have a recommendation for a future conversation, which Karen mentioned, this one about community-based organizations and just the skill set that is required to reach hard-to-reach people with government services and, in agriculture. I think it would be really interesting to dig deep into the state of the art.
Thank you, Eric. All right. How about public comment on items that were not on the agenda?
Yes, sir. If you'd like to make public comment for items not on the agenda, please use your hand icon and I will unmute your line.
Who's the shy man?
Hang on a minute.
Come up to the microphone, Michael.
I did not see any public comment online.
All right. Go ahead and introduce yourself and
My name's
three
Michael
minutes
Harris.
if you could.
When you say 1 minute, but Secretary says come, I'm going to listen to her. But seriously, everything I heard is music to my ears. And we go back about 20 years when Karen was out in the audience with me, Secretary Ross was out in the audience, and it was, anyway, long time ago. And I was coming just to say hi to my sister. I haven't seen her in a while, and I was sharing with Doria that it was about 3 years ago. I was like, you're the queen of California. You're Queen Calafia. Because the conversation we were having in a church in San Rafael at a interfaith conference with our friend Mr. Schwartz, who's running for office. It was just magical, and I think somebody said a prayer that day because some of the things that we're talking about today are being answered. And I was sharing with Glenda earlier, the $333 billion working landscape when it was rolled out in Woodland, seemed like last century, 3 years ago. People don't believe it. I'm like, I sent you the report. I sent you like the executive summary. It's only 3 pages, but the report is pretty comprehensive. And Secretary Ross will tell you the strategic growth kind they have a ton of money. And I'm on the calls, Zoom, I'm like, all the agency heads around the table and they talking and y'all won't get on the phone or get on the call. So in the midst of all the challenges that we have, globally, and a tomato is $1, a lettuce is $2. I'm like, and y'all don't want to grow some food? What's wrong with you people? You want to eat something somebody like replicated or something? I don't know. Keep doing what y'all doing. And my sister, y'all just have no, I hate Helene had to go, but, Glenda board to cover that. And she right down the street. but I'm giddy.
Thank you, Michael. Anything else from the board? If not, we're adjourned. And really great to have everybody here. Exciting to have new board members here, and thank you for your contributions today.